And then Trump, being the bull in the china shop that he is, he constantly just runs things down. He pulls institutions apart. America has tons of problems right now, and they are at least in part predicated on the idea of, well, he can't be that bad. And surely things will survive. And it's like, well, they might not.
Right, but
you don't need Trump, Dev. You don't need Trump to make this argument. Like if 80% of the wealth is held publicly, that wealth is only accessible through politics. That's a huge chunk of everybody's wealth that they don't have access to without some sort of political process.
Well, again, I think that if that were if that were the case, the political economy is really important here, right? That if it were the case that people were voting politicians in that would manage this like huge pot of collective wealth, and we see this in other countries that have these huge pots of collective wealth.
My hand smells.
That seems to be internalized in how a lot of people vote. That people are incentivized to vote for politicians that will openly say, "Look, I'm not going to fuck with this system because I understand how good it is." Like Dev in Canada, you see the same thing with your healthcare system. Like so many politicians, maybe some of them are pretending, maybe they have to feign this kind of position, but at the very least, like the Medicare system in Canada has such a strong political economy that, for the most part, they can make changes on the margin, but you're not going to see like a party become, a majority government in Canada running on completely fucking up the Medicare system, right? Even in the United States, right? Trump.
Canada is capitalist. Norway is capitalist. These are capitalist countries, you fucking inbred moron.
Trump didn't cut Medicare, and he pledged not to cut Medicare because the political economy of Medicare is so strong. And so...
By the way, this is stealing valor. Okay, this is the definition of like socialists trying to steal the valor of like successful capitalist ventures. Okay, like all it is regulated capitalism, which is fucking based social democracy, and like you have these like fucking socialists who are trying to like steal the valor of like these hard work. Okay, of these like proud capitalists. Okay. Fucking hell, dude! It's like everything good is socialist, everything bad is capitalist. Fuck me, dude.
I would just make the argument, and this is, I think, based on other historical examples. Obviously, it's conjecture because we don't know how the future would go. But I would just make the argument that the institutions that I describe have a very strong political economy, and that we wouldn't have a lot of reason to believe.
Every country in the EU that I know of is capitalist. Okay.
Believe that basically the economy would collapse.
Okay. I mean, it sounds like for your changes to have a shot at working, there need to be a massive cultural shift in the United States regarding how Americans view their relationship with their own government, basically.
Maybe. I mean, I think ultimately, again.
Rick, listen to me, okay? Fire is already on suicide watch, okay? I think that might actually push him over the line.
You can start small. Like these institutions can start pretty small, right? So you could start like one holding corporation with $50 billion, and then it's like, oh shit, like, hey, like it turned into $100 billion, and that worked out pretty well. Like, and you can start more of them from there. Like you could accumulate capital in a sovereign wealth fund. Oh shit, we've got like a $10 trillion sovereign wealth fund, right? Like that's pretty nice chunk of change at this point. And like I think eventually people kind of incrementally, as the incremental kind of reform takes hold, kind of form that understanding.
Okay. See, this you and I have had this conversation.
We shall stop spreading propaganda. There are people way bigger than me that are spreading like harsher propaganda than me. If anything, I give a much more measured take than all the fucking PragerU like fucking dick sucker cum socks out there.
Not on stream recently, where I basically said something along the lines of, I don't view your positions as inherent.
Like, what do you think they say about socialism? They probably think that it's like inherent evil, and socialism is all about degenerate shit and whatever. Like, okay, I'm your lying for how bad. Aha! See, this is another example of lefties going after liberals, but not conservatives. Don't you guys see? Fire is a lefty, but he goes after a liberal. You don't see Fire going after conservatives. Do you see that? Do you see that? Boom.
Socialist, and I don't think that liberalism and socialism they work together the way that you think that they do. And I'll give you my reason why. It's a little bit different than Adam and Sitch's. One of the core liberal values is restriction on state power. If you look at any liberal political philosopher, they talk all about you have these massive authoritarian states. I know that I'm not going to make the claim that you're advocating for this. I heard that.
Yo, Masaki, thank you so much for the one gifted membership,
yeah,
dude.
True.
Okay.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you, W. Masaki.
Conversation 10,000 times today already.
Conservatives ban me from their community. Yeah, because it's. I mean, liberals ban you from their community as well. I bet. Okay. I mean, you're just generally insufferable. So
I'm not making the claim that you advocate for an authoritarian state, but one of liberalism's prime concerns is that the government might get too strong and might oppress the people, because the first liberals were writing in an era when that was very common with all the monarchies in Europe. And you would need a massive expansion of government power to do what you want to do, which I do think is fundamentally anti-liberal.
Yeah, I guess I disagree in part. Like, I think that you find a lot of liberal thinkers who expected a lot out of their government. Thomas Paine, for instance, he was a foundational liberal thinker in this country. He's taught in our history classes, of course. He advocated for things like universal inheritance and basic income and stuff like that. That was...
Guys, remember, socialism and communism is bad. Okay, I can't believe I have to say this. Okay, but it's almost as if the fucking economy, like economic project that people have attempted countless times over like the past like 200 years did not work. Okay, whoa, isn't that crazy? An economic project that everyone says that, oh yeah, we're trying this, we're trying this, we're trying this. Okay, all right.
On the government's obviously their responsibility to do, and I think that you find
but this time it will be different. We never tried true communism yet. For
instance, like John Rawls, who I'm sure you would agree is kind of in a contemporary sense, like probably one of the most foundational contemporary liberal philosophers. He thought the government should do a shitload of things. Like he thought the government should provide for so many different sorts of rights and welfare systems. And he said that although at the end of his life it's kind of controversial whether you'd call him a socialist, he did at the very least say that, look, my liberal ideals of justice are achieved by democratic socialism, by a democratic socialist government. And so,
get some foods for your shops. Honestly, I might just DoorDash. I ran out of food from the fridge, so I might just do that. Honestly, thank you. Thank you for the $5.
I think these people were in fact committed liberals, but they were liberals who believed that one of the ways...
Wait, isn't that your first donation?
Get some foods for your shops.
Some guy, I'm pretty sure that's your first donation. Thank you so much, buddy.
To achieve their ideas of liberal freedom was through having a democratic state that did things like I'm describing, engaged in collectivization projects and engaged in welfare redistribution. Or in the case of John Rawls, just like literally did socialism. Like he said that socialism would be a way to achieve his kind of liberal ideals. So it's liberalisms, which you would agree with. And I just happen to be on the, I guess pro-government side of liberalism.
No, you happen to be on the mental retardation side of things, okay?
I mean, I think there's a lot of good faith discussions to have on, how much should the government interfere in the private sector? How much should the government spend on like public healthcare or something like that? But I think most people who call themselves liberals, in good faith call themselves liberals, they would not say something like 80% of the means of production. That's really high.
Yeah, well, that's probably, probably that is true. Most liberals are not socialists, I would say.
Well, right, but the amount of state expansion you'd have to implement to get to that 80% number is more than what liberals would be comfortable with, which is why I don't think that you can be a liberal and a socialist at the same time.
Well, I mean, it sounds...
I don't know.
Well, it sounds like you didn't disagree with my history. Like all those liberal thinkers seems to endorse an expansive role of the state, right? And I mean, insofar as we want to just say, well, but they were a minority of liberals. Maybe I don't have maybe that's true. Like I don't have a survey available to me. I'm just saying that they were part of the liberal tradition. In the case of John Rawls, a very pivotal part of contemporary liberalism, and they endorsed expansive roles for the government. I mean, many people that in this society, people today who call themselves liberal, like just like in a common parlance, like liberals in America vote for the Democrats, and that's the party of big government, right? So obviously, if we're talking in a more pure philosophical sense, maybe not. But if we're saying like, well, most
I don't donate usually, but I like this community. We have an amazing community. Okay, unironically, we have one of the most goated communities. So yeah,
liberals would say this. It's like most liberals in this country vote for the Democrats, So,
well, to be honest, I don't think Americans understand what liberals or conservatives are generally.
The community is so goated that even communists and socialists want to stay, even though they get banned. Okay,
really, because
yeah,
I don't know.
That's
like,
how good.
Probably
there's people who think that liberals are communists. People who think that conservatives are fascists in the United States, and it's like, no, guys, these labels have meanings. I don't like using the American definitions of these words. Because
but I'm saying even if you think of actual like philosophical proper liberals, John Rawls, Thomas Paine, people like this, they there is a tradition of liberalism, which is one that believes that the best way to expand liberal freedoms is through things like public ownership and state and welfare. And even like a guy like John Rawls even endorsed socialism as a system by which he didn't necessarily endorse the system. He believed in property owning democracy, but he did endorse at the very least like as an option for his liberal ideals was democratic socialism. You can say that's an idiosyncratic view and that's a minority view. Maybe that's true, but I don't think it's true that I think a survey of liberal history would include people.
I'm pretty sure ACAT is the one that made that one out of AI.
At least like a couple of slides on people who believed in an expansive role for the government.
Okay, where would you personally put the switch being flipped then? All right, so like, would it be like 50%? If the government owns 50% of the means of production, now it moves into now we can rightfully call it a socialist government. And if it's 40,
I think Econoboi knows he's a boring guy. Instead of coming out as trans, he decided to be socialist. Oh, well,
49%, it's not like.
Yeah, on the binary, I don't know. I guess I typically would speak in relative terms. So if an economy is like, if most of the GDP comes from the collectively owned entities, I would say, well, you got a mostly socialist economy right there. The actual binary classification, I don't know. I mean, you could. I say in my article, is.
Oh God, doesn't Econoboi literally look like a she/they? That's a she/they right there. Okay, there's two kinds of she/they. Okay, goth girls in college and Econoboi. Oh God, oh fuck.
Is this socialism was the question I asked myself, and I basically say that, look, I mean, if we could get to a scenario where 85-90% of the wealth is collectively owned, I mean, if you got an 85 or 90% on a test, usually that's considered a passing grade, so you probably at a certain intuitive point, you just call it socialism flat out, but hard to say at what point.
Oh God, Econoboi does look like a they/them. Fuck me, dude.
Point.
Okay.
You are saying that 90%, if you're at that point, 90% of the wealth in America is collectively owned. People can only access that wealth through the political process, through the government dispensing some sort of check to them. Correct?
Yeah.
Like how did they have access to wealth beyond that?
Well, the fruits of that wealth would be distributed through a democratic process through the government.
Listen, I'm just saying, by Econoboi's standards of self-definition, I would literally be a communist. Like, because the way that Star Trek is like they are literally gay space communism. So yeah, I mean, I guess technically Star Trek's fucking communist shit is like better than whatever we have. Well, I guess. And I guess I want what Star Trek has. It's so stupid. It's actually so retarded. I'm sorry, it's just so stupid.
Right, so you'd vote for the government, and they would do something with the money, obviously. In terms of meaningful access, I mean, there's, I don't know, I don't think that we would typically think of ownership in quite that way. Like, for instance, if you were to have like a trust fund, you have a trust fund and it's going to pay out a certain amount of money every single year to you, but it's like an inheritance trust fund. I think that would still be considered ownership, even though it's like in this kind of trust system.
Yeah, but you wouldn't have access to it. That's the whole point of a trust fund. You get access to it at a certain age, or you get access to a certain amount of it at certain times.
Well, even if it's paid, I'm saying, like, even if it's like this, even if the stock is held and you're only paid out dividends from the stock of wealth, I think you'd still be that'd still be considered ownership, or like wealth accumulation in some sense.
I remember.
And collective ownership is not quite the same thing as individual ownership. But
if you're making if you're getting the dividends.
I remember when Destiny thought that he was like, when he announced that he was bisexual, everyone thought that like Destiny wasn't actually bisexual, because he only, like, I don't know, had threesomes where a girl is always involved and like guys were barely there or whatever the fuck. But it turns out that he is actually kind of gay. So
yes, but if the sovereign wealth fund is getting the dividends.
Oh God.
I mean, that's the biggest problem I see with.
Hey, listen, I've sucked a dick before, okay, literally. So you know what, fair enough.
This, because obviously individual investors own a lot of.
People talk about Econoboi like he's an intellectual, but I just don't see it. Well, no, it's people like Fire that consider Econoboi to be a fucking intellectual. So yeah.
Wealth in the stock market, but in this situation, a lot of that wealth would be being bought by the United States government. So the investors would own, the public would own a smaller and smaller share of that as individual investors.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with your characterization, Adam. I agree that the public wealth that exists in society that's owned collectively is owned and controlled in a democratic fashion. But I guess most socialists would say that that's a feature, not a bug. I mean, that's what kind of makes that's what makes the wealth ownership horizontal, that we all have an.
I don't know. Listen, in the dark, all lips taste the same. Okay, I'm just saying.
Equal say in how to manage that wealth and what to do with the fruits of that wealth. And obviously, you'd say that's bad, but I think that's a good thing.
Well, I just think it's technically. I mean, it puts us at the whims of the political process, which, I mean, you can have wealth accumulation outside of the political process in America, obviously. If you want to start a business, build a business, and build wealth that way, you don't have to be a part of the political process at all, right?
Yeah, people obviously, most, that's what I already said, the top 10% of individuals own 67% of the wealth. I mean, you can individually accumulate wealth. Of course you can, right? But the dynamic of capitalism and private ownership is such that wealth concentrates to a pretty radical degree to, we see this in every society that has, capitalist markets, that, capitalist markets are good at creative destruction, innovation, things like that, because of market competition, the profit motive, things like that. But because of private ownership of that process, we see the wealth the wealth is extremely concentrated, right?
Yeah, it totally accumulates. I agree.
Right.
Yeah, but if the government
Yeah, but I think that's okay. Not everyone can be leaders, and I think that's fine. What? It's like the red pill, right? Like you try to convince everyone that everyone can be a leader. That's like a fucking. Don't worry, Timmy. You're gonna become an astronaut one day. Okay, dude.
owns 90% of the wealth and they're doling it out through a political process, isn't that going to be a highly demotivating thing for people to enter into private business, to start businesses, to even work? Because they're not going to have access to any of that?
This is literally what I was getting at. Uh-oh. Did somebody finally pick up what I was putting down?
No, I mean, we go back to the example of the shoe shop owner, right? So in my system, the shoe shop owner, he can, he wants to start a business. Like, how does he do that? Well, he has to convince people. Why? What? What are you asking?
Why does he want to start a business if the government owns 90% of the wealth?
Because he still can own and control his business and his business's wealth, right? So my system, my practical incarnation doesn't abolish
Nah, you're gonna have the state police come in and seize his property. Okay, let's be honest.
the private ownership of wealth,
I'm just
right? That I do think I've said this 100 times now that there's
Let's be real, okay? They're gonna come in and seize his property.
a lot of practical considerations to think about.
Smelling what you're
But
stepping
when it comes to the individual dynamics, like the reason why the wealth accumulates on the public side is just because the public is making investments, right? Like rich people like it when you make investments for the most part. Now, when a business owner says, "I want to start a new business in a Econoboi system," he has all the same incentives, right? He maximizes profits, he can accumulate capital, he can.
Haven't been in the middle. I can say most people are 100% follow. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, just give them some pussy and some video games, and they'll be satisfied. Jesus. Yeah, everyone is satisfied with pussy and video games, okay? And then they don't need to be a leader anymore. Turns out everyone's want to be a leader is like born out of insecurity or some shit.
Change the business how he wants. If he goes public, that's a choice that he can make, and he can retain as much of the shares as he wants, because you can list whatever proportion you want. If you only want to list 30% of your shares and you want to keep the other 70%, you can do that, right? So you have all the same incentives in my system.
Those 30% of the shares are going to go to the government, though, right? Because they're the ones that are controlling the sovereign wealth and doing most of the investing.
Well, it's going to go to just anybody who's interested in the IPO. So that could be a lot of retail investors. It could be, like you said, a lot of the institutional public investors, right? It could just be wealthy, individuals who just have a lot of money.
Being leader, someone's responsibility. Yeah, that's why people don't want to become like leaders in the first place. Like after you see what, like, dude, I feel like all the leaders I ever knew in my lifetime, throughout like managers and like they've always been mired in like stress and responsibility and stuff like that. Like, dude, I think that the initial want to become a leader fades away extremely rapidly after like a while of being the leader. It's kind of like the sword of Damocles, right, where you have the sword like hung above you and anyone can snap the string and kill you. But yeah,
Hanging around that they want to, I want to buy 5% of this company because I think it's a good value. It's a stock market. Anybody can buy a stock.
Yeah, 80% of the money in that market though is going to be controlled by the government by necessity. If you're saying that the government controls 80% of the wealth, they control 80% of the assets and currency.
Right. So, for instance, 75% of our stock market is already owned by institutional investors, right? So the concentration isn't, I don't think, allocatively a problem. You can make arguments that my
they're
system,
private institutions, though, right? Correct. Like,
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Owned institutions.
Yeah. Right.
So
again,
everyone's motivated to be involved.
I feel like I asked 75% of the questions of substance despite only coming in at the end. We'll see.
In the markets to get their piece of the pie. And I'm
Right.
struggling here to understand if 90% of that wealth is doled out through a government program. It just seems like, why would I work?
Okay, new chat rule. No such thing as glazing dev, okay? Everyone must smack talk him. Okay, I'm kidding. Okay.
At all, unless you're going to be highly restrictive with this, what you're doling out.
you would work because capital income doesn't. It's not all income. 2/3 of income is labor income, not capital income. So you'd still be incentivized to work. With regard to why would I be incentivized to still start a business? Again, it's because you have all the same incentives to start a business as you do now, right? You'd still be able to start a business, make profits. If you don't want to sell it to institutional investors that are public or private or other private investors, you don't have to. Similar to how you don't have to do that now. However, if you want to raise a bunch of equity capital, well, you've got to be willing to sell part of your ownership to raise equity capital. If you don't want to raise equity capital and you just want to do fixed income or you want to charge royalties or something like that, you can do that too, right? I mean, you have all the same.
You could have a system where there's all these businesses that they go public. The government buys 49% of the shares. The rest of the 1% of the shares is owned by, the board of the company and the CEO and high level people in the company, right? And they would not be co-ops to be run the same way as capitalist companies, and you're saying that would be the system?
That could be the system for an individual institution, right? So again, if somebody says I'm gonna go public, but I only want to list 49% of my shares, then they don't have to do that. Well, they wouldn't all do that because again, like a lot of people just want to make money, right? So it's like I'm gonna list 90% of my shares because I just want to cash in, I
mean, they don't but they usually don't want to give up controlling interest to a company that they create.
That's not true. I
mean, unless they're just selling out and they just want to.
A lot of people do that. Like Bezos only owns. I think Bezos owns like 15% of Amazon. Like he doesn't own even close to a majority of Amazon, and the Walton family doesn't own a majority of Walmart.
Does someone own 16% of Amazon?
Does someone
an activist investor got involved and started buying up shares? That's how they would.
I'm saying like
can someone on the board?
Yeah, because you're saying Jeff Bezos owns 16%, but that's because he's like that. There's a bunch of other people that own shares. Does anyone own more shares than Jeff Bezos of Amazon?
No.
Well, okay. But you mentioned controlling interest, right? Well,
yeah,
that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
By definition.
So it would still be a liquid market, right? So if you, for instance, if you wanted to buy, they'd still be listing the share, like, because again, these holding corporations are engaged in an entrepreneurial activity, right? So they'd be buying the shares, selling them as well. They'd be holding them for like short, medium, and long-term investment. So for instance, if you were like a big owner of a company, and like let's say the holding corporations, like all the different holding corporations own 70% of your company on the public stock market, number one, you made the choice to list the shares that way, right? So you made that choice.
Or maybe we don't need socialism and we just need to add VAT taxes. And property-based taxes, and add taxes in between manufacturing steps, and tax the middle class. Maybe we just need to do that, right? And tax and fucking, I don't know, having more tax brackets or something. It's almost as if there are like just way better solutions to do everything without having a fucking dictatorship or something. But okay.
And you can control that choice if you want. Number two, let's say that you're like, you know what, I think I want to take this company back private. I think that these public shareholders are fucking everything up. And you do see a lot of founders, Elon Musk did this, tried to do this with Tesla, for instance. Like, I'm going to take it private again so I can fully control what goes on in this company. You just buy a majority of the shares. You just buy back the shares at the strike price. You can do that at any time if you wanted.
If the government will sell them. How?
I followed James Medlock before I even met you, okay?
How does this avoid the concentration of wealth? Because obviously, if you go to your example of the shoe store guy, he starts a mom and pop shoe store. He builds it up, he franchises, he ends up going public. He sells 30% of his shares to the government and cashes out. He's still fabulously wealthy. I guess the only thing he can really invest. Well, no, he can invest the same way, according to you, right? He can buy shares in other companies and whatnot.
Yeah.
So how's it stop the concentration of wealth? How is it going to stop Elon Musk from still being?
Yeah, two main mechanisms by which the public capital kind of accumulates faster than the private capital. Number one is you've got principal investments on the side of the public. So every time you capitalize a new holding corporation or you further capitalize a sovereign wealth fund, that's like you're sort of.
I just want to say again, there's nothing inherently wrong with having billionaires in this world or having extremely rich people in this world. It sounds like what everyone wants actually are everyone to be well, you want everyone to be living and live a relatively good life, right? That's what you want. But the thing is that like you don't need socialism to accomplish that. You can actually get all of that via taxes. And knowing how to distribute state funds and federal funds and stuff like that, bills and all that stuff. It's almost as if you don't actually need socialism to do that, nor do you need like a very stringent Norway-like system to do that either. Maybe you're overthinking it. You're overthinking it by providing a so-called simple solution, a simple answer to a complicated issue. The complicated issue being, well, whether or not we should just like raise taxes on literally everyone. Sorry, raise taxes on people who manufacture fucking tables, right? Okay, you want to get like fucking table legs from fucking Mongolia or I don't fucking know, some other country. Okay, great. Let's raise the taxes on that. Okay, you want to attach that in some factory. Okay, in some specific step. Okay, let's raise the taxes on that. Okay, let's raise taxes in between every single manufacturing step until everyone has enough. Oh, you want to keep around your 30-year home, 50-year home. Okay, every single year you better pay rent to the state. Good luck. All right, maybe that'll encourage you to sell your home next time, bitch. Okay, anyway.
Necessarily taking private capital and making it public because you're taking, tax money and things like this, and then using that and saying go out and buy, part of the market for the public. So that's one way. Another way is that throughout the process of the voluntary transaction, if a guy, let's say that a guy lists whatever.
So you're taxing, just to be clear, you're taxing the guy, the shoe store guy. He just sold you 30% of the stock in his company, and you're coming by and you're taxing him, and then you're using that to make a capital investment on another company.
Yeah, we'd still have taxes in my system, of course. Yeah, you'd still pay taxes. Now I believe in a hyper efficient tax code, right? So I believe in basically only taxing consumption and not investment. But the second thing that I was going to say, the caveat is like why the capital in the public accumulates in my system and it doesn't just get out, eaten by the private investors, is because when a private investor, a lot aggregately speaking.
Yeah, Fire, you're scaring the hose.
When private investors sell their ownership to other investors, they don't use all that money for investment. They take a lot of that money and just consume it, right? They buy cars and houses and all this other shit, right? And so
Sure.
that's money that's not necessarily accumulating capital. And so those are the two main ways that, and you see this in other societies that really invest in their public wealth, that the private investment, it's not that private investment and private capitalization doesn't exist. It's just outstripped by public investment because, I don't know, the public just puts a lot of principal investment into it. And when you buy out the wealthy's shares, they consume a lot of it. And so the capital from the wealthy doesn't accumulate when they purchase basic consumption items.
See, yeah, this is something that I've been thinking about as well because so let's say we're starting the Econoboi system up, okay?
Econoboi with socialism socialism with Econoboi characteristics, Dev, please. Proper name.
Econo-socialism. How about that?
Economism, yeah.
So we're starting it up, and you need initially you need to actually create these public holding companies. So you're going to probably be building them up using tax dollars. So that might be way more taxes than people want to pay, basically. But okay, you build them up, and then you have these companies buying stock in other private companies until they start to get a controlling amount in those private companies, but then when they reinvest, okay, maybe I'm just too stupid to get it, but like from what I understand, when you buy stock in a company and then the company does well, the value of the stock goes up. You sell the stock and you get a profit. It sounds like for the government to actually be able to enjoy any of the collective wealth, it would also have to be selling stock as well. And if they're not selling it to someone who's a private owner, where's the money coming from?
Yeah, so it's a combination. Yeah, it's a combination of things. So, for instance, I think that number one, these holding corporations would have a dividend policy. So they would have like probably loose dividend guidance to where they would just like directly pay a dividend each quarter or each month or whatever they would do it.
To who? So the sovereign wealth fund? Who gets a dividend?
To the treasury, to the public treasury.
Okay.
The people, the owners. Then obviously the government does whatever they want with that money. Now you could also.
Wait, Foodshops, you said socialism and communism is bad. Thank you for moving off of communism is good if it works. No, I'm still on the road. No, communism is good if it works. But the reason why I think socialism and communism is bad because they don't work. You realize these are not mutually exclusive, right?
Have a fiscal rule, which is kind of what you're describing,
Right.
where you have like actual capital gains, where part of the portfolio is sold. So the question is, okay, well, who buy? Like, if you just tell like the holding corporations to sell their stock, well, who the fuck's going to buy it when basically like the very same entities basically dominate the market? Well, the answer is proportionally those same exact entities, right? Because these are entities with hard budget constraints. So it would be a bunch of other private investors, and it would be the other holding corporations, which would want to essentially repurchase other stocks that are now in the open market. That's part of what I think. That's part of why I think that you have like this limitation on.
I like to schedule a debate. Dude, just hop in now. I hate fucking scheduling debates. It makes me nervous. Jesus. Just hop into the voice chat now. I hate fucking scheduling debates. It's my worst thing. I'll never schedule debates. You have to hop in now, okay?
Essentially like the upper limit on how much public ownership you could have. Like I say 75-80% or something like that on the stock market, because you do need some kind of external liquidity and retail investors and like private investors that are able to purchase stock when it's sold on a fiscal rule in order, like you said, Dev, to capture capital gains for people. But I guess it's also possible that if you have a situation where
I'll hop in some other time.
the state basically owns like almost all of the stock market, I guess, like maybe you don't even, you could make the argument that you don't even need the fiscal rule at that point because the dividend payments are good enough. Like it's just like straight cash, injection at that point. You don't need the capital gains, but I don't know.
Wait,
I'm not
what
as
is it?
I hop in whenever, yeah.
I'm confused. Are the dividends coming from the private companies' profits?
Yeah. So each of these companies would have a dividend policy for its holding corp that it owns. So similar to how like Amazon has, a lot of companies don't pay a dividend, a lot of companies do. Those dividends would trickle up to the holding corporations, and then the holding corporations would make the decision about, okay, well, we got all these dividend payments, we got all of our own capital gains. That's our balance sheet basically that we've built, and we've got this guidance from our owners. So what do we do with this money that we have now? Like, we've got this guidance where we need to pay a dividend to our owners, which is the public in this case. We want to make some reinvestments.
I understand that aspect. I guess what I'm asking is, in the system you're talking about, would it be set up so that if a company goes private, that they automatically have to pay dividends to the government, which would then turn around and distribute those dividends to the people or through social programs?
No.
Is that the system?
Dividend policy would be dictated by the boards at each company, right? And so if you were to have a private company and you were to own most of that company, well, you're the one who's basically deciding who's on the board, and so the board kind of is probably going to, whatever dividend policy you want is probably what the board's going to decide, just like how it works in our current system.
Right, but if all the companies went 51%, or they went public and they can retain 51% of the shares, so the government would get zero dividends because they don't have 49% ownership, right?
Well, no, they would get the dividends in proportion to just whatever the dividends that are paid out. So the 51% of shareholders would still want dividend payments, right? Like the shareholders want you to pay them dividends, right?
Not a lot of companies don't have dividends.
Great,
right, but then insofar as a company doesn't pay an actual dividend, you still have the capital gain associated with the stock as well.
No, but Dev's question was like, if the government owns 80-90% of the stock, it seems like, how are they ever going to make? They can't sell it off. Well, they're going to sell it off.
So these are two different scenarios, right? If the government owns 75 to 80% of the stock, well then, they have 75 to 80% of the controlling interest in these companies, right? And obviously that's not totally proportional, but you get what I'm saying. And so if that's the case, then the government's dividend guidance becomes essentially binding to those companies at that point. Now, in the case that you're
would be bad and worse, you fucking slug. Yeah, that's why you're retarded. Okay.
Describing where, okay, well, the government's only at 40% ownership.
But it's okay. We're accepting of all people of all shapes and colors and mental fortitudes.
And
just to be clear, when I said 75-80%, I meant using what you were saying, that the government owns 80% of the entire market, not necessarily 80% of an individual company.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So you're stuck in a rock and a hard place essentially. So either the government owns 80% of the market, in which case the dividend guidance that they give is binding, so the dividends trickle up to the state, or they own a much smaller minority into where we only own 49% of every company, just as a kind of bizarre hypothetical. Well, the majority shareholders are still, in large part, and we see this today, incentivized to pay out dividends to shareholders. Like there's a lot of dividend payments that get paid because those other shareholders want dividends to be paid out. They eventually want to, capitalize. They eventually want capital gains or returns to their capital at some point. So either through dividends or through things like capital gains income. And so you're still incentivized as a shareholder, even if the government is only 40.
I'd rather have a Sargon, not gonna lie. Well, Econoboi is he looks like as if Sargon lost weight. Okay, he's just Sargon if he lost weight. That's it. Okay.
9% owner to provide capital gains or dividends to the people that own your shares.
Okay, so if I was going to describe this using socialist language, it would be that the surplus value that is extracted from the workers of a company, rather than going to the CEO of the company or the owner of the company, instead it goes into the collective dividend fund of the holding company, and then the government looks at that holding fund, that maybe it becomes part of the sovereign wealth fund or something. There's a big pot of money that's been extracted from all these workers, and then you have various political parties that'll say, we're going to spend it on this social program, and then another party will say, we're going to spend it on this one instead, and then you can vote. Whichever party gets into power can spend that pot how they like.
Yep.
Okay, I think I understand.
Yep. Well, guys, it's kind of late for me, and we've been going for a little while. Are there any other chat or questions?
Yeah,
I think it's been
JMax super chat before he leaves.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks so much, our surrogate father, Daddy JMac, with the $400. Thank you so much.
That's a lot.
$400 super chat. JMac says, the problem with trying to have a reasonable conversation with people like this is people with a liberal mindset should find his claim, quote, ideal society to be antithetical to our accepted idea of private rights. The fact that he can express these policies that are contradictory to liberalism and some just shrug speaks volumes.
Well, we addressed that point in the conversation, our conceptions of freedom. So I won't repeat myself, but anyway, it's been a great conversation. No, we got heated at certain points, but this was definitely pretty productive, guys. And thanks so much for inviting me on. It was fun talking, and yeah, no, just overall, I thought it was an overall pretty good conversation, guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
All right, bye, guys.
Take care.
See ya.
Well. And then there was one, guys. Also, I must have got rated at some point, but I don't think I got a notification for who rated me. So thanks to whoever did that, I guess. Streaming to almost 200 viewers at some point. That's pretty based. Whoa. It was by Hutch. Okay, thank you so much, Hutch. Thank you so much, Father, as I should say. Being respectful. As you can see, I'm a little splotchy. It's been a long conversation.
Father?
Start, live, and learn World War II. I don't know what that means, KW. Patience of a God. Yeah,
Okay. What is this? They don't really talk about the debate much. Then I'm not interested. If I want to watch Desai, I would just watch one of his stupid political videos. Hmm.